The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a sound that echoed through the crystalline halls. Ambassador Jiho walked through first, his black diplomatic suit a stark contrast against the shimmering walls that seemed to be made of frozen starlight. Behind him came Hyan and Minji, both carrying data tablets containing 3 centuries' worth of human achievement and peaceful intentions. They had traveled for 6 months to reach this place, the Nexus Station, where the fate of entire civilizations was decided. Jiho felt his heart beating faster as they entered the main chamber. It was enormous, easily the size of 10 football fields, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. 12 massive thrones arranged in a circle dominated the space, each one crafted from materials native to the homeworlds of the Council's elder species. The air smelled strange, a mixture of chemicals and compounds that came from a dozen different atmospheres being mixed together. The Vorthan throne was made of black volcanic glass, sharp and imposing. Counselor Vexter sat there, his reptilian body covered in deep green scales that caught the light. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and they tracked the humans with obvious disdain as they approached the center of the chamber. Next to him sat the Quilmer representative, not one being but a cluster of insectoid creatures that moved in perfect synchronization, sharing one mind across many bodies. The Lefani existed as pure energy, contained within a crystalline matrix that pulsed with different colors. 9 other species completed the council, each one ancient, each one powerful, each one looking at the humans like teachers look at students who haven't done their homework. Jiho reached the center platform and bowed respectfully. Hyan and Minji did the same. They had practiced this moment 1,000 times, running through every possible scenario. Humanity had worked for this opportunity for decades. Ever since they had developed faster than light travel and discovered they were not alone in the universe. Vexther's voice came out as a hiss that the translation device rendered into perfect English. Humans, you petition the Council for membership. You wish to join the civilized species of this galaxy. Is this correct? Yes, Counselor, Jiho responded, keeping his voice steady. Humanity seeks partnership with the Galactic Council. We offer our friendship, our knowledge, and our commitment to peace. Partnership. The word came out of Vexther's mouth like an insult. You are barely 300 years into space travel. The youngest species on this council has explored the stars for 12,000 years. What makes you think you are ready for partnership? Minji stepped forward before Jiho could respond. She was the mission's cultural expert, and she had prepared for this exact question. We may be young in terms of space travel, but humanity has much to offer. Our scientists have made breakthroughs in quantum computing. Our engineers have developed new propulsion systems, and our doctors have cured diseases that affect 17 different known species. We've brought samples and documentation of all of this. The Quilmer cluster vibrated, creating a sound like wind chimes. Impressive for children. But children do not sit at the table with adults. They must earn that privilege. Jiho felt a cold sensation in his stomach. This wasn't going the way they had hoped. The briefings had suggested the council would be stern but fair. This felt different. This felt like they had already made up their minds. Vexther leaned forward on his throne. The council has reviewed your petition. We have decided to accept humanity into our organization. However, there are conditions that must be met. Jiho nodded slowly. They had expected conditions. Every species that joined the council had to prove themselves first. We are prepared to hear your requirements, Counselor. What came next changed everything. First, Vexther began. Humanity will provide 70% of all agricultural production to council distribution centers. Your farming techniques are efficient, and many of our member worlds require food assistance. Hyan's fingers tightened around his tablet. 70% would leave humanity's colonies struggling to feed themselves. But Jiho kept his expression neutral and waited for the rest. Second, all human military vessels must be decommissioned and destroyed. You will maintain no armed forces beyond basic planetary defense. The Council provides protection to all member species. Minji's jaw clenched. Earth had enemies, pirates, and territorial disputes with non-Council species. Giving up their military would leave them defenseless except for Council intervention, which could come too late or not at all. Third, 16 of your colony worlds exist in territories the Council has designated for future expansion. These colonies must be evacuated within 2 standard years. That was 8 million people who would need to be relocated. Families who had built homes, farms, and entire communities would lose everything. Jiho wanted to speak, wanted to object, but Vexther wasn't finished. Fourth, all human scientific research must be submitted to Council oversight. We will determine what technologies are appropriate for a species of your development level. Fifth, all human trade must flow through Council-approved channels, with standard tariffs applied. This will be 85% of transaction value. The list went on. Mining rights surrendered. Territorial claims voided. Cultural practices subject to Council approval. Technological development restricted. Each new condition was another chain, another limitation, another piece of sovereignty stripped away. Finally, Vexther delivered the killing blow. And lastly, humanity will be classified as a probationary species. You will have no voting rights in Council decisions. You will have no legal standing in Council courts. You will have no territorial sovereignty beyond your homeworld. This status will remain in effect for a minimum of 500 years, at which point the Council will review your species for possible elevation to junior member status. The chamber filled with sounds of approval from the other Council members. Clicks, whistles, harmonic resonances, each one expressing satisfaction with these terms. This wasn't negotiation. This was subjugation dressed up in diplomatic language. Jiho stood very still, processing what he had just heard. 500 years of servitude. 500 years of humanity being treated as lesser beings. 500 years of watching the fruits of human labor, human genius, and human sacrifice being taken by others who contributed nothing in return. He thought about Earth, green and blue and beautiful, home to 8 billion people who had worked so hard to reach this moment. He thought about the colony worlds, young and struggling, but full of hope. He thought about the human ships exploring unknown space, carrying the dreams of a species that had always looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. And he thought about his grandfather, who had fought in Earth's last major war and told young Jiho that some things were worth fighting for, and some insults could never be accepted. Jiho looked up at Vexther and the other Council members. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. We came here seeking friends. We found masters who mistake themselves for gods. The chamber went silent. You dare! Vexther began, rising from his throne. Jiho turned to Haiyan and Minji. Pack everything. We're leaving. Humanity doesn't bow to anyone. He walked toward the exit without waiting for a response. Behind him, Haiyan and Minji followed without hesitation. The Council erupted into outrage, voices raised in multiple languages, demanding the humans' return, threatening consequences, calling them fools. Jiho didn't look back. The doors closed behind them with that same echoing sound, but this time it felt like freedom. 3 years had passed since the humans walked out of the Galactic Council chamber. Gabin stood in the observation deck of a small trading station on the edge of Council space, watching ships come and go with tired eyes. He was one of the few humans who had remained behind, tasked with closing out business deals and selling off human assets. It was lonely work, made worse by the fact that most species now avoided him. Associating with humans had become politically dangerous. In the first months after humanity's departure, the Council had celebrated. Vexter gave speeches about maintaining proper order in the galaxy. He talked about how the Council had to remain firm with upstart species who didn't understand their place. The other Council members had agreed publicly, praising the decision to hold firm on the membership conditions. But Dabin saw what they didn't want to admit. He saw the cracks forming in their perfect system. The Quilmer were the first to feel it. Their industrial worlds had been producing goods at incredible rates, factories running day and night to supply the entire Council economy. What most people didn't know was that human engineers had been quietly helping optimize those production systems. Small improvements in efficiency algorithms, better cooling systems, smarter resource allocation. Nothing dramatic, just steady improvements that added up to huge gains over time. When the humans left, they took those improvements with them. The Quilmer tried to keep the systems running, but within 6 months, production had dropped by 40%. Their engineers couldn't figure out what the humans had done. The code was there, but understanding it was different from writing it. Factories began to fail. Assembly lines ground to a halt. The Quilmer Queen sent desperate messages to the Council, demanding help that never came. Then, the Lithani dimensional gates started malfunctioning. These gates allowed instant travel between distant points in space, but they required incredibly complex mathematics to remain stable. Human theoretical physicists had been contributing research papers that solved some of the quantum fluctuation problems the gates experienced. The Lithani had accepted this help casually, never realizing how dependent they had become on human insights. Without those corrections, the gates became unreliable. Travel times tripled. Ships started arriving at the wrong locations. Accidents increased. 3 gates collapsed completely, killing thousands and stranding millions. The Lithani sealed their borders and refused to speak to the Council, blaming them for driving away the humans. The worst disaster struck the Vorthan homeworld. A plague swept through their colonies, a mutating virus that affected reptilian species. Human medical researchers had been working on a vaccine, combining Earth biology knowledge with Vorthan physiology. The research was 70% complete when the humans departed. The Vorthan doctors tried to finish the work, but they lacked the background in the specific techniques the human team had been using. The plague killed 4 million Vorthan in the first year, 8 million in the second year. By the third year, entire cities were quarantined, and Vexter's own clutch of eggs had been infected. The Council leader watched his children die one by one, knowing that human scientists could have saved them. Dabin received reports of all this through his network of contacts. He felt no satisfaction in their suffering. He had liked many of the people he had worked with, had made friends among the Quilmer, and even shared meals with Vorthan diplomats. But he also understood that this was the natural consequence of the Council's arrogance. They had treated humanity as a resource to be exploited rather than a partner to be respected. The Council economy was collapsing in other ways, too. Humans had been the galaxy's most reliable cargo transporters. They honored every contract, delivered on time, and treated goods with care. The species that tried to fill the gap proved to be corrupt or incompetent or both. Shipping costs went up by 5 times the original rate. Food spoiled in transit. Valuable equipment arrived damaged. Entire cargoes disappeared, stolen by pirates who grew bold in the chaos. Without human agricultural exports, 3 Council species faced serious food shortages. The Quilmer had exhausted their own farmland generations ago and depended on imported food. Human vertical farming techniques and gene-modified crops had been feeding billions of Quilmer. Now those same billions were going hungry, and riots had broken out on 6 major hive worlds. Dabin watched a Quilmer merchant ship limp into the station, its hull scarred from a pirate attack. The captain was someone he knew, a decent being who had always treated humans fairly. The captain saw Dabin through the observation window and made a gesture that roughly translated to, "I'm sorry." Dabin nodded back. It wasn't the captain's fault. On the council station itself, the political situation had become toxic. The member species were blaming each other for the disaster. The Quilmer accused the Vorthen of driving the humans away with their arrogance. The Vorthen blamed the Lithani for not valuing human contributions. The Lithani blamed everyone for being blind fools. Old alliances were falling apart. Trade wars erupted. Military tensions increased. Consular Nalvik of the Quilmer had tried to approach Vexter privately several times. "We must reconsider our position on the humans. We need them back. Offer them better terms, equal membership, anything they want." But Vexter refused every time. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit the mistake. They will come crawling back eventually. They need access to council space. They need our markets. They need our protection. They'll accept our terms when they get desperate enough. Except humanity never came back. Their borders remained sealed tight. No diplomatic messages. No trade requests. No communication at all. It was like they had vanished from the galaxy completely. Dabin knew the truth, though. He received encrypted messages from Earth every few weeks, carefully routed through neutral space to avoid council detection. Humanity wasn't suffering. They weren't desperate. They were thriving in ways the council couldn't imagine. While the council fell apart, humanity had found new friends. Species that the council had ignored or exploited were eager to work with humans on fair terms. New trade networks were forming outside council control. Human technology was advancing faster than ever without council restrictions holding them back. One message from his sister Sujin, who had been humanity's cultural attach, told him about a secret offer the humans had received. A Quilmer faction, desperate and acting without council approval, had begged for human aid. They offered full council membership, equal status, immediate voting rights. Everything humanity had originally asked for. The human government had considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds before rejecting it. The council had proven what kind of partners they would be. More importantly, humanity had discovered they didn't need the council at all. Dabin finished his last transaction in council space 1 month later. He sold the final human property, transferred the credits to Earth's account, and booked passage on a neutral trader's ship heading toward the border. As his ship left the station, he looked back at the massive structure, seeing the lights flickering in sections where power was failing. The Galactic Council had stood for thousands of years, an empire built on the backs of younger species. They had made one critical mistake, though. They had assumed that everyone needed them, that there was no other way to exist in the galaxy. Humanity had proven them wrong. And now the Council was paying the price for that arrogance, slowly crumbling while the species they had dismissed walked away and built something better. Ambassador. Jiho stood on the observation deck of the research vessel New Horizon and smiled for the first time in months. The view before him showed a planet covered in vast oceans, its surface broken only by scattered archipelagos of volcanic islands. 3 moons hung in the sky above it, and the system's yellow sun cast everything in warm, golden light. Bora, the ship's chief xenobiologist, stood beside him with her hands clasped together in barely contained excitement. "They're beautiful, Geo. Their cities are underwater, built into coral reefs they've been cultivating for 10,000 years. Their art is incredible. They communicate through color changes in their skin and through songs that travel through water. The Torvins were the 7th species humanity had made contact with since leaving the Council. Each encounter had followed the same pattern: respectful first contact, cultural exchange, identification of mutual benefits, and fair negotiation of trade agreements. No demands. No exploitation. No claims of superiority. It was working better than anyone had dared to hope. Ho watched a Torvin shuttle rise from the ocean surface, water streaming off its organic hull. The Torvins had developed bioengineering to incredible levels, growing their technology rather than building it with metal and circuits. What do they need from us? Terraforming help, Bora explained. Their colony worlds don't have the right ocean chemistry. We can help them adjust the mineral content and temperature. In exchange, they're willing to trade cultural works and their genetic engineering techniques. They've offered to help us develop better food crops. It was exactly the kind of partnership that should have existed with the Council. Both sides giving, both sides receiving, both sides benefiting. No one kneeling to anyone else. The Independent Systems Coalition had started as a simple idea. Humanity and 3 other species, all of them tired of being exploited or ignored by the Council, had agreed to work together on equal terms. They wrote a charter that emphasized sovereignty, dignity, and mutual respect. They created trading agreements that benefited everyone fairly. They shared technology openly, with each species contributing what they could. Within 5 years, the coalition had grown to 12 member species. Each one brought unique strengths. The Dresh were silicon-based life forms from high-gravity worlds. Their understanding of mineral processing and mining was unmatched in the galaxy. The Winari were nomadic traders who knew every back route and hidden system in 3 spiral arms. They had been cheated by Council species for generations and were thrilled to find partners who paid fair prices. Tai Yang, humanity's head of military development, had transformed Earth's defense capabilities. Without Council restrictions, human engineers had pushed forward in every direction at once. They developed directed energy weapons that could punch through any known shielding. They created quantum shields that could absorb incredible amounts of damage. They built engines using artificial gravity manipulation that made their ships faster and more maneuverable than anything the Council possessed. The Dresh had contributed their crystalline technology, materials that could store and channel energy with perfect efficiency. The Winari had shared stealth techniques they had developed to avoid Council pirates. Together, the Coalition's military technology had leapfrogged decades ahead of what the Council used. More importantly, Coalition member species actually wanted to defend each other. They weren't being forced into military service. They weren't being exploited. They were protecting something they had built together, something worth fighting for. Jiho left the observation deck and made his way to the conference room where Yuna was waiting. She was the director of human intelligence operations, and her expression told him the news wasn't good before she even started talking. The Council is falling apart faster than we predicted, Yuna said, bringing up holographic displays that showed economic charts and population movements. 4 member species are on the brink of collapse. Food riots, plague, industrial breakdown. It's bad, Jiho. He studied the data with a heavy heart. He had never wanted the Council species to suffer. He had just wanted humanity to be treated with respect. And Vexther? Still in power, but barely. He's arrested dozens of political rivals who suggested negotiating with us. The Vorthan military is propping him up, but even they're getting restless as the plague spreads. Yuna switched displays. But that's not the worst part. Look at this. The new display showed military movements. Council ships gathering in staging areas. Troop buildups on border worlds. They're preparing for war. Not against each other. Against us. Yuna zoomed in on intelligence reports. They've discovered the Coalition exists. They know we're thriving while they're suffering. Vexther has convinced the Council that we're the reason for their problems. He's arguing that if they can conquer Coalition space and seize our resources, they can save themselves. Jiho felt his blood run cold. They're desperate enough to attack? More than desperate. They're terrified. The Council has ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. The idea that someone could build a successful civilization without them, that someone could be happier and more prosperous outside their system, it threatens everything they believe about themselves. Yuna closed the displays. We have intelligence suggesting a fleet is being assembled. 300 ships at minimum. Maybe more. The door opened and Kenji entered, still wearing his disguise as a Torvan merchant. He had been deep undercover in Council space for 2 years, gathering intelligence at great personal risk. It's confirmed. The war fleet launches in 3 weeks. They're targeting our colony at New Sol first. They think if they can destroy one of our major settlements, the rest of the coalition will scatter in fear. Jiho sat down heavily. This was his worst nightmare. He had walked away from the Council to avoid conflict, to build something better. Now conflict was coming anyway, brought by beings who couldn't accept that their way wasn't the only way. Can we defend ourselves? He asked Tai Yang through the communication system. The military director's face appeared on screen. Yes, absolutely yes. Our technology is superior. Our ships are better. Our people are motivated in ways Council troops aren't. But it will be bloody, Gio. A lot of beings are going to die on both sides. Then we prepare for war. Jiho looked at each person in the room. But we do it our way. We defend ourselves. We protect the innocent. We show mercy when we can. And we make it clear that we're not conquering anyone. We just want to be left alone. Over the next week, Jiho traveled to coalition member worlds, meeting with leaders and explaining the situation. Every species agreed without hesitation. They would stand together. They would defend what they had built. And they would show the Council that bullying and exploitation were not the only ways to achieve power in the galaxy. The Torvans offered to share their rapid healing technologies to save wounded soldiers. The Dresh provided materials for better armor and ship hulls. The Winari mapped out defensive positions and supply routes. Humanity contributed weapons, shields, and tactical training. On the day the Council fleet entered coalition space, Admiral Mino stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and watched them come. Beside him stood officers from 6 different species, all working together with the smooth efficiency of people who trusted each other completely. They think we're easy prey, someone said quietly, studying the enemy formations. They're about to learn differently. Jiho watched from Earth, surrounded by the Coalition Council. He felt sick with the knowledge of what was about to happen, but also grimly determined. The Council had made their choice. Now they would face the consequences of underestimating those who walked away. Vorthan War fleet arrived in Coalition space like a storm made of metal and plasma. 300 warships, each one massive and ancient, bearing weapons that had conquered dozens of civilizations over millennia. Admiral Kurseth commanded from his flagship, confident in his overwhelming numbers and the terror his forces would inspire in these upstart species. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Mino watched the enemy fleet approach with calm eyes. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. Somain, his tactical officer, highlighted weaknesses in the Vorthan formation on the holographic display that floated in the center of the bridge. They're using formations from 6 centuries ago, Soman observed, her voice clinical and professional. Look at how they cluster their dreadnoughts in the center with lighter ships on the flanks. It's classic Vorthan doctrine. They haven't changed their tactics in generations. Minho nodded slowly. The Council had stopped innovating because they had never needed to. When you've been winning for thousands of years using the same strategies, why change? What's our ship count? 87 vessels, answered G1, the communications officer. 23 human, 41 Dresh, 16 Winari, 7 Torvan. We're outnumbered more than 3 to 1. Those numbers would have terrified any Council commander. But Minho had seen what coalition ships could do in exercises. He had watched human weapons cut through target drones like they were made of paper. He had seen dress shields absorb punishment that would have vaporized older generation ships. He knew what the Winari stealth technology could accomplish. All ships begin evasive pattern delta, Minho ordered. Wait for them to fire first. I want them committed before we respond. The Vorthan fleet crossed into weapons range and immediately opened fire. Plasma batteries, the Council's primary weapon system for centuries, lit up space with brilliant streams of superheated matter. The shots came from extreme range, standard Council tactics designed to soften up an enemy before closing for the kill. Coalition ships danced between the plasma, streams like leaves in wind. The quantum drives that human engineers had perfected allowed for impossible maneuvers, changing direction and speed in ways that violated what the Vorthan understood about physics. Ships that should have been hit weren't even close to the firing solutions Kursith's gunners had calculated. On the Vorthan flagship, confusion rippled through the crew. "They're too fast," reported the tactical officer. "Their acceleration curves don't match anything in our database." "Then fire more," Kursith ordered. "Saturate the space. They can't dodge everything." The Vorthan fleet increased their rate of fire, pouring enough plasma into space to destroy a small moon. The coalition ships continued their dance, but now some shots were getting through. A Dresh cruiser took a direct hit to its forward shields. The shields held. They didn't just hold. They absorbed the plasma and channeled it harmlessly away into dispersal grids that glowed bright blue as they vented excess energy. The Dresh had built shields using their crystalline technology, materials that could handle energy loads no metal could withstand. What would have destroyed a Council ship barely scratched a coalition vessel. "Sir," the Vorthan tactical officer said, his voice uncertain now, "their shields aren't failing. We've hit that cruiser 6 times, and it's still combat effective." Kursith leaned forward in his command throne, scales darkening with frustration. "All ships close to point-blank range. We'll overwhelm them with mass fire." It was exactly what Minho had been waiting for. "Now," he said quietly, "all ships return fire." Coalition ships lit up as their weapons activated. Directed energy lances, beams of concentrated power that made plasma look like children's toys, reached out across space at the speed of light. The Vorthan had no warning, no time to react. The beams punched through Council shields like they weren't even there. Through armor that had protected those ships for centuries. Through internal bulkheads and reactor cores. A Vorthan dreadnought, pride of their fleet, simply came apart. One moment it was advancing confidently. The next it was expanding debris cloud. Then another. And another. Winari strike craft appeared from nowhere, their stealth technology finally disengaging as they launched kinetic impactors at close range. These weren't energy weapons, but solid projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds using gravity manipulation. When they hit with the force of small nuclear weapons. Vorthan ships crumpled like tin cans under a hammer. The battle that Kursith had expected to last days was over in 2 hours. His fleet was in full retreat. What remained of it? He had lost 60 ships without destroying a single coalition vessel. Not one. His flagship was damaged, his fleet was shattered, and his confidence was destroyed. "Pursuit course," Minho ordered. "Send a message to their command. Surrender or be destroyed." The message was delivered through every channel. Kursith received it on his damaged bridge, surrounded by sparking consoles and injured crew members. His pride, that ancient Vorthan pride that had ruled the galaxy for so long, made him refuse. "All remaining ships, defensive formation. We make our stand here." It was a massacre. Coalition ships tore through the Vorthan defenses like they were fighting children. The technological gap was too wide, the tactical advantage too overwhelming. When it ended, only 23 Vorthan ships limped away, heavily damaged and carrying news of their catastrophic defeat to a council that wouldn't believe it. On the Nexus station, the Galactic Council convened in emergency session. The chamber that had once been filled with pride and confidence was now thick with fear and confusion. Counselor Vexter was absent, arrested by his own government for the disaster he had led them into. Nalvik, now the senior counselor, stood before the assembled representatives and played the battle recordings. They watched in stunned silence as coalition ships dodged plasma fire that should have destroyed them. They watched shields that shouldn't exist absorb impossible amounts of damage. They watched weapons that carved through council dreadnoughts like hot knives through butter. How? Someone whispered. How did they become so powerful? A hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. Haun, humanity's new chief diplomat, looked out at the council with cold eyes. She was young, barely 30, but she carried herself with absolute confidence. Behind her stood representatives from each coalition species, a visible reminder that humanity wasn't alone. You assumed we needed you, Haun said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. You were wrong. We didn't need your permission to thrive. We didn't need your approval to build something better. We just needed you to leave us alone. You couldn't even give us that. Nalvik stepped forward, his cluster of bodies moving in agitated patterns. The attack was a mistake. Vexter acted without proper authorization. The Council wants peace. We want to negotiate. No, Haun said flatly. You want to survive. There's a difference. But we'll give you terms anyway, because unlike you, we don't enjoy watching civilization suffer. She listed the demands, each one echoing what the Council had tried to impose on humanity years before, but modified to be less harsh. Coalition forces would occupy certain Council territories until reparations were paid. All enslaved or tributary species would be freed immediately. The Council military would be reduced by half to ensure they couldn't attack again. Trade would only occur through coalition oversight to prevent exploitation, and the Council would submit to a tribunal for war crimes. The chamber erupted in outrage. These terms were humiliating. They were impossible. They were everything the Council had done to others, now being done to them. You can't do this, Nalvik protested. The Council has stood for thousands of years. You can't dismantle us. We're not dismantling you, Haun corrected. We're reforming you. You taught us that might makes right in this galaxy. You taught us that the strong can dictate terms to the weak. Congratulations. You're now on the receiving end of your own lesson. She paused, letting that sink in. The difference is, we're not going to destroy you. We're not going to enslave you. We're going to help you become better than you were. But first, you're going to face consequences for your actions. You're going to free those you've oppressed. You're going to make restitution for the damage you've caused. And you're going to learn that cooperation is stronger than domination. The hologram disappeared, leaving the Council in shocked silence. They had started this war confident in their superiority. They had ended it broken and forced to accept terms from species they had considered beneath them. Outside the station, coalition ships took up occupation positions, their advanced sensors watching for any sign of treachery. Inside, the Council began the long, painful process of accepting their new reality. 2 years after the war ended, the Galactic Council chamber opened its doors for a session that would have been unthinkable a decade before. The chamber had been cleaned and repaired, but the scars remained visible if you knew where to look. Scorch marks on the walls where fires had burned during riots. Cracks in the crystalline structure from when desperate species had tried to storm the building. The thrones themselves looked smaller somehow, less imposing than they had been. Ambassador Jiho walked through those doors again, but this time everything was different. He was older now, his hair showing gray at the temples, his face carrying the weight of difficult years. He had retired after the war, wanting to spend time with his family and try to forget the images of burning ships and dying beings. But they had called him back for this moment, because some things required the presence of those who had been there from the beginning. Behind him walked Danby and Woojin, representatives of the coalition's judicial and economic committees. Danby was a lawyer who had spent 2 years prosecuting war crimes cases against council officials who had committed atrocities. Woojin was an economist who had helped rebuild the shattered council economy according to fair trade principles. Both of them carried the quiet confidence of people who had done hard work and done it well. The council chamber was full, but not with the beings who had occupied it before. The 8 remaining member species sat in their sections, but they were joined now by dozens of observer species. Freed tributaries, former slaves, young civilizations that the coalition had helped develop without exploiting. All of them were here to witness this historic moment. Counselor Nalvik stood at the center platform where Jiho had stood years before. The Quilner leader looked older too, his cluster of bodies moving more slowly, their coordination less perfect. The past years had been hard on everyone. Ambassador Jiho, Nalvik began, his voice humble in a way that would have been impossible for any council member a decade ago. We thank you for agreeing to attend this session. We know the journey here brings back difficult memories. Jiho nodded acknowledgement, but said nothing. He had learned over the years that silence could be more powerful than words. Nalvik continued. The Galactic Council formally petitions for membership in the Independent Systems Coalition. We recognize that we were wrong in how we treated humanity and other species. We dismissed your contributions and took your departure as an insult rather than the warning it was. We responded to your success with jealousy and violence. We were the barbarians we accused you of being. Around the chamber, other council representatives stood and spoke, each one offering their own acknowledgement of past wrongs. The Leithani representative pulsed with colors that indicated shame and regret. A Vorthan diplomat, not Vexther who had died in prison, spoke about the plague that had killed millions because of pride and arrogance. A Quilmer engineer talked about watching factories fail because they had never bothered to understand the human systems they had depended on. It went on for over an hour, each species taking responsibility for their part in the disaster. Jiho listened to all of it, seeing genuine remorse in most cases, political calculation in others. He knew not everyone here had truly changed, but enough had, and that was what mattered. When they finished, Jiho stood and walked to the center of the chamber. He looked around at all the faces, human and alien, friend and former enemy. He thought about his grandfather and what he would say at this moment. When we walked away 7 years ago, we didn't do it to punish you or to prove ourselves superior. We did it because your terms were unacceptable to a free people. We would not be slaves, even comfortable ones. We would not surrender our sovereignty to beings who had done nothing to earn that authority. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You offered us membership in your council, but what you really offered was servitude dressed up in diplomatic language. 500 years of being treated as lesser beings. 500 years of watching others take the fruit of our labor while contributing nothing in return. We said no, and you couldn't understand that. You couldn't imagine that anyone would choose dignity over security. Nalvik bowed his cluster of bodies. We understand now. We learned through suffering what we should have learned through wisdom, that all sapient beings deserve respect. That cooperation is stronger than domination. That building together creates more than taking from others. Jiho looked at Danby and Woojin. They had discussed this moment for weeks, debating what conditions would be fair. What requirements would ensure real change rather than just political theater? Now came the moment of truth. The coalition will accept your petition, Geo said, and he saw hope light up in eyes and energy fields and body language across the chamber. But membership requires more than words. It requires demonstrating through actions that you've truly changed. He outlined the requirements that the Coalition Council had agreed upon. Former council species would need to free all tributary peoples and make restitution for past exploitation. They would open their governments to coalition oversight during a transition period of 10 years. They would contribute to coalition defense, but maintain no independent military beyond basic system defense forces. They would trade fairly and submit to coalition courts for dispute resolution. Most importantly, they would need to embrace and demonstrate the coalition's founding principle in their own behavior, that all sapient species, regardless of age or power or technology, deserved dignity, sovereignty, and respect. This will take a generation, Nalvik said quietly. Perhaps more. But we accept these terms. We will prove ourselves worthy, membership. The other council representatives agreed, some enthusiastically, others reluctantly. Jiho could see who meant it, and who was just going along because they had no other choice. But that was all right. The ones who meant it would carry the others forward, and the next generation would grow up in a different galaxy dot as the session ended and beings began filing out. A young human diplomat named Yasiel approached Jiho. She had been born after humanity's departure from the council, had grown up in a galaxy where the coalition was just the way things were. Do you think they'll truly change? She asked. Jiho watched the former council members leaving, their postures reflecting humility rather than the arrogance they had shown before. Some walked with genuine shame, others with resignation, a few with barely concealed anger at their reduced circumstances. Some will, he said honestly. Some won't. There will be setbacks and resistance, and people who long for the old ways. But enough of them understand now that the old ways led to disaster. They saw their civilizations crumbling. They watched beings they cared about suffer and die because of policies built on exploitation. That kind of lesson changes you. He looked at Eziel. We'll give them the chance we asked for all those years ago. The chance to prove themselves as equals rather than being judged as inferiors. That's what separates us from what they were. We remember what it felt like to be dismissed and diminished, so we won't do that to others. Over the next 3 months, the first former council species completed all transition requirements. The Quilmer, who had suffered the most during the council's collapse and had the least to lose from change, joined the coalition as full members. They brought their industrial capacity and their hard-learned humility. They contributed to coalition, development projects, and accepted oversight without complaint. Others would follow over the next decade. The Lefani took 5 years, but eventually joined, bringing their dimensional gate technology into the coalition network. The Vorthen took longer, their pride still wounded, but a new generation of leaders eventually brought them in. Some species never joined, choosing isolation over accepting the new order. But the galaxy had changed permanently. The Galactic Council, as it had existed for millennia, was gone. In its place stood the Coalition, an alliance built not on domination, but on partnership. Species joined because they wanted to, not because they had to. They contributed because it benefited everyone, not because they were forced. Jiho retired again after the transition period ended, this time for good. He spent his final years on Earth, writing a memoir about humanity's journey from hopeful applicants to coalition founders. The last chapter talked about the importance of knowing when to walk away from a bad situation and having the courage to build something better. Young beings across the galaxy read that memoir in school. It became required reading for diplomatic training in dozens of species. The message was simple but powerful. Respect and cooperation will always be stronger than domination and exploitation in the long run. Humanity had walked away from talks, seeking nothing but respect. They had returned having built a better galaxy, one where no species would ever again have to make that choice between dignity and survival. And across 1,000 worlds, beings who had once bowed to masters now stood as equals. All because one species had the courage to say no and the strength to prove there was another way.